You're watching NBC4, working for you. Live from the area's leading news station, this is News 4 at 11.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
President Bush tonight condemning today's acts of terror and vowing to bring those responsible to justice. The searing images from today's incredible attacks remain with us tonight. 2 hijacked planes crash into the World Trade Center towers in New York. A little while later, the buildings crumble with thousands believed trapped inside. A 3rd hijacked plane smashes into the Pentagon, possibly leaving dozens dead and injured inside, possibly hundreds. A 4th plane also crashes, this one near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The deadly chain of events tonight has left Americans feeling frightened and vulnerable as we try to cope with what was once unimaginable. Good evening, I'm Doreen Gensler.
And I'm Jim Vance. A number of school systems in the area will be closed tomorrow because of the terrorist attacks today. You'll be able to see that information at the bottom of your screen. We begin tonight with new developments regarding the crash at the Pentagon. That plane took off from Dulles Airport. Officials say as many as 800 people may have been killed when the plane crashed into the Pentagon. Also, the Washington Post is reporting on its website that the plane was heading toward the White House when it made a tight turn, circled around, and then slammed into the Pentagon. Julie Carey is at the Pentagon now with the latest on the situation there. Julie?
Jim, the building that is the very symbol of our nation's security is still burning tonight, more than 13 hours after it was the target of a terrorist attack. There is an untold number of victims inside, and tonight one fire official estimates that as many as 800 could be dead here. And with the fire still burning, hope is dimming that there will be any survivors to rescue. The first close-up view of the horrific aftermath, a yawning hole left in the southwest side of the Pentagon. Wreckage of the hijacked American Airlines 757 visible in the rubble where the building collapsed. Tonight, reporters were escorted into the Pentagon through the smoky hallways for a briefing by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. It was an effort to show that despite the deadly attack, the government is still operating.
The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow.
Top military officials used harsh terms to condemn the terrorist assault.
We have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people, acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country.
The scene outside the Pentagon was surreal all day long and into the evening as flames once again shot into the sky. It was around 9:40 this morning when the hijacked jet carrying 58 passengers and 6 crew members plowed into the building full throttle, penetrating through 3 of the 5 rings of hallways that make up the Pentagon's unique design. Witnesses describe an orange fireball, a concussion, then thick black smoke.
I looked over to the side and I saw this jet coming in, and it was really low, and it was an American Airlines jet. You could read the AA on the side, silver fuselage, and it kind of disappeared over this embankment here for a moment, and then huge explosion, flames flying into the air, and just chaos on the road.
The portion of the building that was hit had recently been renovated and some areas were unoccupied. This construction worker was inside laying tile.
I'm up in the 6th corridor, and next thing you know, all of a sudden this whole explosion looked like you know, like one of them movies, like the airplane type, and all my cot started to rock, and I had to put my feet out to hold it. Then I see 2 trash cans coming out of the corridor, just flying past me, then smokes.
Still, witnesses say the evacuation of nearly 23,000 employees was quiet and orderly. Once outside, though, many broke down into tears, and those with injuries were helped to stretchers. Tonight, Virginia Senator John Warner summed up the impact of the attack.
This is indeed the most tragic hour in America's history.
Pentagon officials refuse to estimate how many have perished inside. They say all on the plane were certainly killed, along with many others.
The numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Now, tonight's briefing inside the Pentagon offered few specifics about what added measures are being taken to safeguard the Pentagon or to retaliate. But in his concluding statement tonight, General Shelton said, "Make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready." Reporting live from the Pentagon, I'm Julie Carey. Back to you.
Thank you, Julie. The Pentagon is asking members of the military to call into their respective branches to let them know they're okay. There are several numbers the Pentagon has asked us to pass along. Those numbers are for military personnel and for family members concerned about a relative's status. There are two numbers for Army personnel. They are 1-800-984-8523. Also 703-428-0002. There is one number for the Navy and the Marines. That number, 1-877-663-6772. Members of the Air Force are asked to call 1-800-253-9276. Again, those numbers are for military personnel and their families.
Local search and rescue teams that have traveled the world to offer assistance during crises are at the Pentagon tonight. Brian Moore is at the Pentagon with that side of this story. Brian?
Doreen, the rescue teams from Fairfax and Montgomery counties have been all over the world, and their mission tonight is to try to find survivors. But this likely, officials say, will become a body recovery mission. They've been everywhere. They're experts, they're professionals, but this task is unlike any other because it's so close to home. They've been witnesses to some of the world's worst calamities and participants in the search for survivors, the dead, and preserving evidence that tells the story of exactly what happened. They're members of the Fairfax and Montgomery County collapse rescue teams, and they've traveled the world to help in times of trouble.
We got experience in both natural and man-made disasters, obviously, a lot of experience. That part of this is not shocking us. Obviously, the shocking thing is its proximity to home and the impact of where it is.
The team stood by for most of the day, waiting for their chance to see the Pentagon disaster from the inside. And just before the sun set, the first recon teams went in.
You have smoke, you have hazards as far as fuels, fires, and things that are burning. You have metal, you have concrete, you have all sorts of debris that certainly poses a hazard to the rescuers and to the rescue operation overall.
Each department brought a 70-person team, and each member has highly specialized training.
From technical search, which has listening devices, they have specialized fiber optic devices to be able to look in small spaces and void spaces. We have our canine search groups working the building. We have medical specialists in the building to take care of our task forces.
Officials say they expect this to be an extended operation.
We're assuming a minimum of 3, 4, 5, 6 days. Just the search and rescue teams and doing all the things that they're going to be doing, including basically picking apart the damaged parts of this building piece by piece.
Now, these teams are specially trained and equipped by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They have some of the best equipment in the world. They will be working 12-hour shifts in the most grueling environment you could imagine. They will be relieved at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning by 2 other urban search and rescue teams, these from Virginia Beach and from Tennessee. I'm Brian Moore, live at the Pentagon. Back to you.
Brian, thank you. Jim?
Cities across the nation are on high alert tonight. A state of emergency has been declared in many areas, including here in the District of Columbia. Pat Collins is at D.C. Police Headquarters now with more on that. Pat?
Jim, because of what happened today, the way we live, the way we work will never be the same. Here now from Police Chief Charles Ramsey.
There will never be another day like today. Nothing from this point on will ever be the same.
An eerie sense of emptiness in our nation's capital. Streets closed off by MPs, by police, with flares and flashing lights. At the Washington field office of the FBI, streets patrolled by men with automatic weapons. 14th and Pennsylvania Avenue downtown. Not many people around, not many places to go. Freedom Plaza, blocked off. Pennsylvania Avenue, blocked off to the east, blocked off to the west. Jersey barriers moved into place at the John Wilson District Building. Public safety workers grouped as a task force and strategically deployed around the city. Is the city safe today?
Oh, absolutely it is. We have a lot of officers. We went to split shifts. There's 1,800 of us working right now. I think we moved quickly to open up traffic, but the city is quiet. The city is normal. There's no information that there's threats of attack to us, but we are being careful and being prepared for the what could come.
Joining me live now, Margaret Kellum. She's the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. Can you tell us what's going to be open, what's going to be closed tomorrow?
District government will be open and operating on a liberal leave policy. The federal government will also be open and operating on a unscheduled leave policy. The D.C. public schools will be closed, as will the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV headquarters here at 301 C Street, which is in the basement of Indiana Avenue.
Why close the public schools?
We're concerned that all of our resources be available to manage any issues that may come up in the city, to control traffic. We think the best thing that we can do is give the children the opportunity to stay home. It will alleviate some of the congestion on the street. It will certainly free up some of our resources to make sure they're focused on the city.
Now, there's likely to be some street closings as well tomorrow morning.
At this point, we're hoping there won't be, but there are some streets, obviously, that are still at this point closed, particularly, I think, between 14th and 17th on Constitution Avenue and I Street, right around the White House area. We're hoping that we're going to have all of the streets open, but we encourage people to check the media outlets in the morning. We'll get information out there, and be patient, be prepared, but be patient for some delays.
The city has been preparing for the IMF World Bank meeting later this month and a lot of demonstrations surrounding that. What is the position now of the city?
At this point, obviously, today has cast a new light on things. This is a federal event, the IMF World Bank meeting, and it will really be a decision of the federal government whether to go forward. Obviously, they're in very close consultation with us. Our focus right now is on today, the events of today, and on tomorrow. Not so much on the end of the month, but certainly this has cast a new light on the issue, and we need to work through that.
And the chief is recommending that it be canceled.
The chief's concern, obviously, is a security concern, and we're talking about, airplanes coming out of the sky and crashing into buildings, and even the best security plan for 100,000 protesters isn't preparing you for airplanes crashing into buildings. So I think the chief is, is appropriately concerned.
Thank you very much. Margaret Kellums, Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. Jim, back to you.
All right, Pat Collins, thanks. The governors of Maryland and Virginia have also declared a state of emergency. Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore has activated approximately 600 members of the National Guard. The state government will be open for business tomorrow unless the office is in the same location as a federal office that is closed. In Maryland, Governor Paris Glendening has also issued a state of emergency. State offices will be open tomorrow, but non-essential employees will be permitted to take unscheduled leave.
Airports all across the nation remain closed tonight. The Federal Aviation Administration has grounded all commercial flights in the United States until at least noon tomorrow. The plane that was hijacked, that crashed into the Pentagon, took off from Dulles Airport, and Jackie Benson has the latest from Dulles.
At a shut-down Dulles Airport, a new baggage X-ray machine is brought through a security checkpoint and into the main terminal. Earlier, cement barricades had been put into place to block access to the upper-level departure area. Overhead, the only planes in the sky were military fighter jets. It is here at Dulles that the events leading to this morning's horrific crash at the Pentagon began, with the hijacking of American Airlines Flight 77 to Los Angeles, with 58 passengers and 6 crew members on board. At the airport's Marriott Hotel, American Airlines has set up a center for family members of those on board Flight 77 to come and get information. FBI investigators hope the airport itself will provide clues as to who's responsible for the hijacking. They examined passenger lists and reviewed security videos. Vehicles in the parking lot were examined, and at one point, police quickly stopped a U-Haul truck, but they found nothing. Shortly after this morning's attacks, Dulles Airport was evacuated. Passengers were forced to flee the terminal. Many had to leave their baggage behind. Some grew very upset when they learned the reason behind the evacuation.
My family doesn't know where I am right now. They know that I'm in D.C. and they know that there's been planes hijacked, so my phone won't work. All the airlines are clogged.
You're just beside yourself going, what do you do? What can we do? trying to get back to our families and trying to get a hold of everyone and get home, and it's very scary.
That was Jackie Benson reporting from Dulles Airport. American Airlines has set up a hotline for family members to call. Here is the number: American Airlines, 1-800-245-0999. At Reagan National Airport, passengers and workers poured out of the terminal as the Pentagon burned nearby. People who were already on planes and people who were in the terminal were evacuated. The people we spoke with said it was an orderly evacuation from National this morning.
When we saw the smoke from the Pentagon, we knew something was wrong. But anyway, yeah, so they shut everything down.
Were you on the flight?
Yeah.
You were in the plane?
Yeah, Northwest. We were number 2 for takeoff. And then they shut down the engines and they said that there's a national emergency and they're returning all the flights.
Most of the out-of-town travelers made their way to nearby hotels this morning.
Some of the people injured in today's attack at the Pentagon are being treated tonight at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington. Chris Gordon is there now with the latest on that story. Chris?
Jim, tonight here at the Virginia Hospital Center, 9 people are in critical condition from the Pentagon attack. But what is of grave concern is how many are still unaccounted for.
For Arthur Carver, his wife and daughter, the worst nightmare is not knowing about a missing family member. They came here to the Virginia Hospital Center looking for his sister, 34-year-old Sharon Ann Carver of Waldorf, Maryland, who works at the Pentagon for the Department of the Army.
After about 6 p.m. this evening, we still hadn't received a call and we hadn't heard anything from the hospitals or anyone else. The whole family started to panic and we decided to go out on our own and started looking for our sister because we had tried calling the number at the Pentagon, but we weren't getting any answer there, so it started getting a little frustrating.
Arthur Carver left without finding his sister. Relatives checked every hospital in the area. In the hours after the attack on the Pentagon, 43 victims were brought here to the Virginia Hospital Center. As night fell, they were ready for more patients from the Pentagon.
2 of our doctors are on site at the Pentagon at this moment, and we are waiting to hear from them to assess the situation, know what we need to be prepared for.
Helicopters brought some of the most badly burned victims to the Washington Hospital Center's MedStar unit. The Archbishop of Washington stopped by to donate blood.
As soon as you hear it, you think, well, you're going to pray. You're going to ask the Lord to help these people who are injured, to receive those who have died, and in a very special way, you're going to ask the Lord to look out for their families.
Now, the Washington Hospital Center has 7 people listed in critical condition as a result of the Pentagon attack. Here in Arlington, 9 people are critical, but they could be considered the lucky ones when compared to how many are still missing. We're live in Arlington. Back to you now in the studio.
Thanks, Chris. It did not take long for people in the area to offer their help by donating blood. This afternoon, a line quickly formed at the Woodburn Blood Donor Center at Inova Fairfax Hospital. People from throughout Northern Virginia took it upon themselves to show up and waited in a line to donate. The director of the center says disasters usually bring out a lot of donors, but this was the biggest crowd she'd ever seen.
In New York City, crews are trying to reach people believed to be trapped in some of the buildings near the World Trade Center. Candace Gibson is in New York with the latest there. Candace?
Doreen, and those rescuers reportedly had a miracle earlier this evening. 2 police officers found alive under the rubble of the World Trade Center towers. The rescuers, though, continue at this hour to search, and we're continuing to get developments as this story unfolds. Within an instant, a terrorist attack has changed life in New York City. Rescue workers continue to comb through debris, searching for any victims.
There's thousands of people dead. It's horrific.
It all starts around 9 o'clock this morning. One of the 2 World Trade Center towers is on fire after a hijacked airliner slams into it with dozens of people on board.
There was bodies everywhere. They were all on fire and broken. It was just the most horrific thing you've ever seen in your life.
Some 18 minutes later, a second commercial airliner slams into the second tower, sending a huge fireball into the air.
This is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my...
Within hours, the 31-year-old towers came tumbling down, becoming a rubble of memories.
It just collapsed. The whole thing is not even a girder standing. It's like they didn't even exist.
Late this afternoon, a third building in the World Trade Center complex collapsed. Several hours after the attacks, New York City remains under a state of emergency. New Yorkers in a state of shock. And we are back now live. The rubble that you see there, the smoke that you see there billowing out, it's all coming from where the towers once stood. On an average evening, all of that area, that is the lower Manhattan area, would be lit up. Not necessarily the case tonight. The lights that you see there in the background, those are the lights that the rescuers are using right now to try to get to many of the victims inside. New York, as you know, is a city that never sleeps. Today, it is trying to wake up from a nightmare. Throughout the city, the streets are practically deserted. No one walking in the streets right now, heeding warnings by police authorities to stay indoors unless they really need to be outside. Many New Yorkers that you do see outside are still looking at what used to be the World Trade Center complex, and with tears often filling their eyes. In the meantime, tomorrow is going to be another rough day for New Yorkers. Much of lower Manhattan will be closed down. All of the airports will be closed. Schools will be closed as well. Another day of state of emergency. That's the latest from New York. I'm Candace Gibson. Let's go back to you.
Thank you, Candace. Jim?
After the deadly attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, there was a fourth hijacked plane that crashed. United Airlines Flight 93, a Boeing 757 that was en route from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, crashed into a field about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 45 people were on that plane. The crash left a crater 20 feet long and at least 8 feet deep. Virginia Congressman Jim Moran says during a military briefing today, he was told the plane's intended target was Camp David. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge says no matter how prepared you think you are for an event like this, you're never really quite ready.
I think one of the things we need to understand is that cowardly acts of terrorism can happen anywhere at any time.
Security analysts say the crash site could provide early and important clues into the investigation if the plane's black box can be found.
President Bush, in his address to the American people tonight, said the country came face to face with evil today, and he promised those who carried out the acts of terrorism will be punished.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
The president arrived at the White House from Andrews Air Force Base this evening when the news first broke this morning. Mr. Bush was at a school in Florida to talk about his education initiatives. He flew from there and headed to a secure air base in Louisiana. Then about 1:30 this afternoon, the president boarded Air Force One again and flew to Nebraska's Offutt Air Force Base, home to the U.S. Strategic Command, which controls the nation's nuclear weapons. First Lady Laura Bush, the Bush children, and Vice President Cheney were all whisked away to secure locations shortly after the first attacks occurred. There was a bipartisan show of support for the president from Congress tonight. Democratic and Republican members of the House and Senate stood in front of the Capitol at sunset. They condemned the attacks and said they stand united behind President Bush. After a moment of silence for the victims, they sang God Bless America.
God bless America, my home, sweet home. God.
Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle also said that Congress will convene tomorrow and will speak with one voice to condemn the attacks and to comfort the victims.
Security was tightened at U.S. embassies overseas after the attacks today. In many places, there has been a touching show of sympathy from people who live in other countries. Outside the embassy in Berlin, Germany, a small memorial is beginning to take shape. Someone has set up candles in honor of the victims, and other people are bringing flowers. In Russia tonight, people are going to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Many of them are bringing flowers and offering their condolences and their prayers. Here in our area, people are offering their support and prayers for the victims. Sarah Lee is at the Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church in Alexandria with more on that story. Sarah?
Jim, it was an impromptu prayer vigil here tonight, but easily more than 500, perhaps even 600 people showed up to pray and to comfort each other as a sign of solidarity. Just a few miles down the road from the Pentagon, hundreds come to this Alexandria sanctuary to look for answers amidst the horror.
Many families I know right now are not sure what's happened to their loved ones at the Pentagon, and so they're very apprehensive and worried.
Like a shepherd leading his flock of shell-shocked parishioners, Bishop Paul Laverty of the Diocese of Arlington presides over this prayer vigil. More than 500 came seeking solace, many of whom have friends and loved ones who work at the Pentagon. In his homily, the bishop cautions parishioners to resist the temptation to feel vengeful, even offering prayers for whomever may be responsible.
The initial reaction on all our parts is the feeling of revenge. That's so natural to us. And yet, as a people of faith, we have to get beyond that, because violence does not end violence.
As they do every Sunday, congregants offered each other a sign of peace. But tonight, handshakes seemed firmer, hugs more heartfelt.
It was just, I looked around the church and saw the people that were there, and I knew that, many of them probably lost people at the Pentagon today. I saw a friend there that's a flight attendant for American Airlines and knew the entire crew on that plane. So I just, my hearts go out to everybody. Everybody's lives changed today.
Parishioners were clearly moved, some even leaving the service early in tears. Sarah Lee, live in Alexandria. Jim, back to you.
Thanks, Sarah.
We take a brief look now at our weather. Bob Ryan's in the Weather Center with the forecast. Bob?
Doreen, right now temperatures around the area are in the low 70s, and humidity is fairly low too. Look at some of the temperatures, and you can see what's around our area. Up to our north, temperatures across northern Maryland right now into the 50s and low 60s. From here on in, we will be seeing some sunshine. There's nothing showing up on the radar. The next 7 days, tomorrow we'll be seeing temperatures into the low 80s, about 81 degrees with sunny skies, and then partly cloudy skies. There may be a few scattered showers as we head on into Thursday, and as we head on into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, temperatures in the 70s, and there you can see what's going on around the country. Skies, there are a few scattered showers down to our southeast, and also a new tropical depression. Could be a new tropical storm forming in the Gulf of Mexico. Overnight tonight, skies will be clear with temperatures overnight tonight into the 50s to about 60 degrees in town. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny skies, light winds, temperatures near 80 degrees. And again, through much of the country, at least weather-wise, no storms and some fairly settled weather and clear skies. And on into the weekend, that's the story too. Back to you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
An update now on the Pentagon attack today. As many as 800 people are feared to have been killed there. Search crews are still there, and the fires have been burning throughout the night.
That's a live picture of the Pentagon, and rescue crews and fire teams will be on the scene there throughout the night. In New York City, the World Trade Center search for survivors continues. As we heard in the earlier report, you can see from that picture that it is dark in lower Manhattan right now. The electricity is turned off. All we are seeing is the lights of the rescue teams as they look for possible survivors in the massive debris in lower Manhattan.
Here in Washington, schools will be closed tomorrow, but the Pentagon will be open, as will other government offices and services. Metro will be running, except for the stops at the Pentagon.
It has been an unbelievable day here in Washington, in New York, across the nation. The unthinkable has happened, and we've heard it said over and over. But this is a day that we will all remember for the rest of our lives, and a day that may change our lives forever.
The likes of which we have never seen before, and which all of us certainly tonight can pray that we will never see again.
We invite you to stay tuned to News 4 and to NBC News for continuing coverage of the attack on America. NBC News will have continuing coverage throughout the night tonight. News 4 will be back on the air tomorrow morning. Joe Krebs and Barbara Harrison will have the latest tomorrow on News 4 Today. You can tune in beginning at 4 a.m.
That is our broadcast for now. We invite you to stay tuned to continuing coverage of these events today.
Good night.
This is an NBC News special report. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening, everyone. It is 11:30 Eastern Time on the 11th day of September, a day that on the clock at least is drawing to a close, but the long nightmare that this country has been suffering all day long continues well into this night, through the next day, and well beyond. You are looking now at the Pentagon, where Pentagon officials are saying at least 800 civilian and military personnel were killed when a hijacked airliner was driven into the side of the Pentagon this morning after that attack on the World Trade Center in New York. The most concentrated and efficient and cold-blooded terrorist attack on America in its long history, the most serious attack since Pearl Harbor. President Bush is back at the White House tonight. He has pledged to the American people that those responsible will be brought to justice, and any nation that harbored them will suffer the consequences as well. In lower Manhattan, frantic rescue efforts continue underway. The collapse of two 110-story towers and another 40-story building, tons of rubble and steel and debris and smoke. But now New York City police officials are telling us that some people trapped in the rubble are on their cell phones saying they're still alive. Let's go to NBC's Rahema Ellis now and get the latest from her. She's had a tour of Ground Zero. Rahema?
Tom, I'm about 15 blocks right now from the World Trade Center, but with two outstanding producers and an incredible cameraman, the four of us made our way past the police barricades and right into the heart of the disaster. Take a look at some of these pictures. The firefighters are still hosing down the smoldering remains of what is left of the World Trade Center area, and the emergency searchlights cast an eerie glow over this area. It is absolutely frightening and devastating. There is no one in this area except emergency workers. They are literally raking through the rubble, hoping that they will find someone alive. And in a miracle of miracles, within the hour, I was told, they did pull one man, a Port Authority worker, from the rubble alive. 30 minutes prior to that, a fire department official told me they pulled another man from the rubble. We understand he is also a Port Authority worker, that he was pulled alive from the rubble and taken to a nearby hospital. It is almost unbelievable to think that anybody could survive what has happened down in that area, Tom. It is just covered with dust and soot. It is difficult to see. It is very hard to breathe. Nonetheless, the firefighters are going inside, but there are still fires that are breaking out throughout the area. As one firefighter told me, they're going in teams, but because it is such an unbearable heat, they can stay in for only a short time, and then they have to come out. But in the staging area, the deputy fire chief said they will continue to send in waves of firefighters all night long. They are not giving up hope that they might find more people alive. Tom?
NBC's Rahema Ellis, those are extraordinary pictures that you're sharing with us now. This is from earlier today, the collapse of those twin towers of the World Trade Center. There have been rough estimates that there may have been as many as 20,000 people inside at the time. Many of them were able to escape through the stairwells when the planes first hit the building number one and then building number two, but then thousands more were trapped inside and they have not been heard from. There were not as many patients at the New York City hospitals as people had anticipated because simply there were not that many that they were able to get out of there. Then when the buildings came down, emergency rescue personnel, firemen and policemen were in the area. The New York City Firemen's Union reports that at least 200 firemen were killed at that time, although city and state officials, including the mayor and Governor George Pataki, say that that number cannot be confirmed. People are saying quietly that they do expect the death toll could be in the thousands. That's the scene in New York City. We want to get you an update now on what is going on in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, the emblematic building of the United States military, a fortress that it was attacked today. by a hijacked airliner. And tonight we got the stunning news that the military is saying that 800 people at least were killed in that attack. NBC's Jim Miklaszewski is there now. Jim?
That's right, Tom, and there's little hope of actually finding, unlike at the World Trade Center, of finding any survivors here. One of the reasons is you look back at the devastation and you can see where the 757 American Airlines that was hijacked by the group of terrorists who were at the controls, when they slammed the plane into the side of the building, the plane sliced deeply into the building. What you're looking at here is called the E-ring. There are 5 rings to this building, and the plane continued on through the E-ring, through the D-ring, into the C-ring, where the damage occurred. But one of the problems is, even as the upper floors collapsed down on the wreckage, there was an intense fire that burned for hours. So the hopes of finding any survivors is very dim tonight. Firefighters seem to have finally gotten the fires under control. They continued to flicker and actually burst through the roof throughout the evening. They'd bring back in the trucks and hose it down, only to find a fire pop up somewhere else in that section of the building. But for about the past hour and a half or so, we haven't seen any more flames. But according to local fire officials, the rescue workers are now in the scene there. We did see some heavy earth-moving equipment moving some of the rubble, a clear sign that they don't expect any survivors underneath. And those rescue workers with cadaver dogs are going through the rubble in search of what now local fire officials say may be as many as 800 dead. Tom?
NBC Jim Miklaszewski. They're operating really on 2 tracks at the Pentagon, aren't they, Jim? They're trying these rescue efforts in the portion of the building that was attacked by the airliner, but at the same time, America has its military forces around the world on highest alert. So the military operations have to continue out of that same building.
And they're continuing apace, Tom, and it was almost in defiance of this attack today that Secretary Rumsfeld and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Hugh Shelton held a news conference in the Pentagon, at the opposite end of the building, but nevertheless in the Pentagon, even as this devastated portion here continued to burn. And during that news conference, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Hugh Shelton issued a pledge that America would retaliate against those responsible. And I can tell you that for some time that the U.S. military has always had a variety of contingency plans in place to attack various terrorist targets. In this case, the prime suspect, Osama bin Laden. Military officials confirmed tonight that the Pentagon, the White House, national security advisors are taking a very close look at all those plans tonight. One immediate step that the military took, the aircraft carrier Enterprise had just left the Persian Gulf, was on its way home, and the Pentagon said, not so fast, stay there, we may need you.
All right, NBC Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon tonight. Jim, stand by as you have all day long. We'll be coming back to you later. A couple of other quick updates on what's been going on in the nation's capital. At the White House, the president had a long day going from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt and Omaha, then back to the White House for a short address to the nation tonight. Senior White House officials say he'll begin his day tomorrow with a National Security Council meeting. They also say that they're putting out what they call an administrative alert to all federal employees, requesting that they donate blood tomorrow. There have been lines around the block here in New York at hospitals that are taking blood. Officials also say that the airports in America are on track to open at noon tomorrow. Here in New York City, the mayor and the governor both have said to the citizens of the city and the people who do business here, tomorrow's a good day to stay home, be with your children or your family, because this is a deeply wounded city. They've got, in lower Manhattan, an enormous rescue operation underway. The rest of the city, obviously, is in a state of psychological shock at this point as to what has happened. Let's listen to Mayor Rudy Giuliani and some of what he had to say just moments ago at a news conference in New York City.
The rescue efforts will obviously go on all night. We have been able to rescue two people, 2 Port Authority police officers who are alive. I do not know what condition they're in, but we are hopeful that we'll be able to rescue some more people. I have no idea how many others, but at least there's some hope that we'll be able to get some people out. We have been able to get 2 people out who have been identified as Port Authority police officers. I don't have their identities and I don't have their condition. That's the good news, and all night we'll keep trying to extricate people through tomorrow. And there are over 1,000, well over 1,000 rescue workers and emergency workers down there now. Could be 2,000. And the New York Police Department and the Fire Department, emergency services, the assistance that we've gotten from the National Guard, and if you go down there, you'll see fire departments from East Meadow and Belmore and northern New Jersey, and we really appreciate their efforts. It will be of great assistance all during the night. If you have questions that we can answer or try to answer, the number is 1-212-560-2730. That's 1-212-560-2730. I know that there's great concern over what the numbers of people lost are. We don't know the answer to that. The dimension will be very large. In terms of the people we're looking for, it's a couple of hundred firefighters and police officers, which is a staggering number. As far as the number of people in the building, that'll be in the thousands. But there's no way of knowing at this point, and we're going to keep praying and hoping that we save as many people as possible.
Mr. Mayor, there are reports that there are a group of survivors in the basement of the World Trade Center, that they have cell phones. They've been calling their relatives in Seattle to tell them precisely where they are, and that there's a group of NYPD police who are with them and alive and well. Do you know about this?
I know that rescue effort's been going on for a couple of hours, yes.
Mayor, do you know anything about the report about the possible explosives that were found in New Jersey?
Yeah, I think the police commissioner was able to get information about that.
I just got a confirmation from the chief of detectives. He's reached out to the...
All right, that's Mayor Rudy Giuliani and police and rescue officials. He did confirm what we'd heard earlier, that there were a couple of hundred firemen and policemen that are missing in that rubble, and probably thousands who were in the building when they came down. He said it's going to be a very large number in terms of those who are lost. They're trying desperately through tonight and in the days to come to rescue those who may be alive. So we have, at this point, well over 1,000 people confirmed dead. The 300 that are missing that he talked about, 800 at the Pentagon, 266 who were on those airplanes today, passengers and crews. We're now up to about 1,300, and it is expected to go much higher. 2,400 people altogether were killed in Pearl Harbor. They were military personnel for the most part. It was a military attack on military installations. We know who did it. This is a different kind of a war in a new century. So let's go to NBC's Pat Dawson, who's been on duty not too far from the World Trade Center throughout this long day as well, talking to emergency rescue personnel. Pat?
Tom, over the past 2 to 3 hours, we have seen a number of those rescue personnel, emergency workers, police, fire, coming out, finishing what amounts to their shift for the time being. They will be sent for some rest and brought back here again tomorrow. I would say of the 2 to 3 dozen that we spoke to, almost consistently, without exception, all of them reported on the devastation inside, and pretty much all of them came to the same conclusion. They didn't see how anyone, based on what they'd seen, and I think probably confirmed by those extraordinary pictures that we saw in Rahima Ellis's report earlier, they didn't see how anyone could have survived in there. Yet, nonetheless, we are having reports now, some fragments of good news, if you will, in the midst of all this devastation. You mentioned, of course, the fact that there are reports of people calling with cell phones who are inside that building alive, in addition to which the mayor mentioned the fact that they actually have rescued 2 people from the rubble in that building, and we're going to talk to our guest about that right now. This is Inspector Gene Ceccarelli of the Port Authority Police. Inspector, it has been a long, very difficult day, but you have had some encouraging news in the last couple of hours.
Yes, we did have 2 officers that were trapped in an area on Liberty Street, and there was a noise heard from that particular area by an emergency services rescue person, and who alerted us to the fact that they did identify themselves as Port Authority police personnel. And after an extensive effort to extract them from that area, both were taken from the rubble and are on their way to area hospitals and are being treated at this time.
Do you have any idea of their condition?
I don't know that at this time.
The other report that we wanted to ask you about, earlier we had heard that an FBI spokesperson said that there was a report on the George Washington Bridge, which is another facility which you folks are responsible for policing, a report that there had been a van stopped there that had explosives. Have you, the Port Authority Police down here, heard anything about that?
I have received no reports on that particular incident, and there's nothing that has been brought to our attention to that effect.
Okay. Austin?
At this point, you're basically looking to continue the rescue operation through the overnight period. I assume you're sending more people in there. Is that correct?
We'll continue the search and rescue operation through the night into tomorrow. We have new troops coming in the morning, and we'll continue to stay here all night until we have to do what we can to retrieve anybody that's still in that area.
Inspector Gene Ciccarelli of the Port Authority Police. Tom, I can only tell you that, as we said, a lot of the firefighters coming out of there, although not terribly happy about their duty, are saying that the scenes are of devastation, but they're going to continue going back in there in the hopes that they may find, as they did earlier, some people still alive. Tom?
Thank you very much. Pat Dawson, a real brotherhood, obviously, and these big city fire departments and rescue operations, especially during a time quite like this. Pat alluded to a report that there had been a van loaded with some explosives stopped near the George Washington Bridge, which is the northern end of Manhattan Island. It turns out the van had no explosives. They did detain the drivers for a time. There have been any number of reports all day long about bombs in schools, planes setting down because there was a rumor of a bomb on board. We are told tonight, however, that FBI officials think that they've gotten a name out of one of the passenger manifests. It triggered an alarm when they entered it into their database at FBI headquarters. They have obtained a warrant to search the former home of this man. It's believed to be in Broward County for possible evidence. This is all, at this point, as much as we know about it. The FBI obtained the name of the passenger, as I say, from one of the flight manifests. And we don't know the man's name, but the FBI thinks that he could be one of the terrorists. It is in Broward County, which is just north of Miami. These terrorists entered these planes, two of them in Logan Airport in Boston, and one at Dulles and one at Newark. The chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee is the senator from Florida. He is Bob Graham. He joins us now on the telephone. Senator, I don't know whether you heard what I was just saying, but we do have a report that the FBI is looking for some evidence in Broward County because a name on one of the passenger manifests, when it was entered into the data bank of the FBI, set off some alarms. Do you know anything about that?
Tom, I do not. This was the first I had heard of that possibility.
Everyone continues to say that all the suspicion centers primarily on Osama bin Laden, the Saudi dissident, who is widely believed to be harbored by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Is that what you're hearing as well from American intelligence agencies?
I have not had a specific briefing from the CIA or FBI. We will do that tomorrow. And my feeling is that prudence would be to withhold premature judgments. It's important that we determine who the perpetrator was, but it's also important that we get it right. You may remember after Oklahoma City, the first assumption was that it was an Islamic group. It turned out to be a United States militia group. We're going to respond, as the president said tonight, very forcefully against whoever we determine to have committed this horrendous act. So we need to be sure that we are responding against the right person or the right supporting state.
Senator, there have been any number of terrorism experts on the air tonight and throughout this day who are saying, well, we shouldn't be surprised by the fact that there was a terrorist attack. We've all been expecting that, although most of them were stunned by the complexity and the magnitude of it all. But have we turned a deaf ear to all these warnings about how vulnerable America is to terrorism?
I don't think we've turned a deaf ear, but we have been allowing our front line of protection against terrorism, which is our intelligence services, to gradually degrade. We have not been maintaining our capacity to eavesdrop on terrorist groups in the same way that we did for 30 or 40 years against the Soviet Union. We have not made the investment in human intelligence, particularly people with the diversity of backgrounds, language skills, and technical skills to effectively get inside these terrorist cells and determine what their capability and motivations might be. And we are collecting a substantially greater volume of information than we are able to adequately analyze and therefore use for intelligence purposes. We need to shore up all those areas of weakness in our intelligence system.
Finally, Senator, this is a terrible wake-up call for this country. Will there be a redistribution of resources, in your judgment, to beef up the war against terrorists around the world in terms of military personnel and political efforts that will be made?
Yes. For some time, people who have made these assessments have almost universally established that our two major threats to national security were the 7,000 nuclear warheads still in the possession of the Russians and terrorism. I don't think we've been applying adequate priority to that terrorism threat. This will be a wake-up call. It's a terrible thing that it took such a loss of life and a shock to the American people to do so. But I think as we look back from some perspective of history, September the 11th, 2001 will be the turning of a page in the history of America, and in this new chapters that we're about to write, we'll be putting the kind of importance and resources behind the challenge of terrorism that the threat deserves.
Thank you very much, Senator Bob Graham, who is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democrat from the state of Florida. We're joined now by one of the most highly regarded terrorism experts in America, Brian Jenkins, a veteran of Vietnam. We heard earlier today one of the firefighters in New York saying, "I was in combat for a year. I've never seen anything like this." As you look at these scenes, is there any doubt in your mind that we are in a state of war with terrorism, Mr. Jenkins?
No, I don't think there's any question about it. The scale of the incident is unprecedented in the annals of terrorism, and indeed we have to go back. I think even I'm not even sure the metaphor of Pearl Harbor, which has been used frequently today, is adequate. At Pearl Harbor, there were approximately 2,400 casualties. It's entirely possible that we will see, I hope not, but it's possible that we will see those figures surpassed today. This brings to mind the images that one saw of the Blitz in London, of the cities in Europe during World War II.
But in those cases, both Pearl Harbor and the Blitz, we knew who the enemy was. And in this case, they hijacked civilian airliners, used innocent civilians as weapons against other innocent civilians, and we don't know who they are. So it is a whole new form of warfare for a new century.
It is completely different, and we're not going to have in this type of warfare the satisfaction of landings at Normandy Beach or anybody coming out on the decks of a battleship to ultimately sign a surrender. And that is going to create inevitably some frustration between, on the one hand, the anger that this incident will create. Right now, the American people are stunned, they're frightened, they're alarmed, and that's understandable, but that will very quickly congeal to anger as we fully comprehend the cost, the carnage of today's attacks. There's going to be frustration between that and our ability to achieve what will be seen as victories in this war against terrorism. You know, Tom, I think people don't understand that the war goes on constantly. There are constant reports, intelligence reports, threats, warnings that we react to. We react to them by issuing alerts, in some cases by increasing security at a particular location, in some cases by evacuating an embassy. And those actions, in some cases, thwart the terrorist plans. But those victories are invisible. We can't count things that don't occur. What we see are the failures of intelligence, the failures of security, as we see here today.
Brian Jenkins, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We now have some more details about what was going on these airliners. Cell phones are ubiquitous in American life, including on these planes as they were being hijacked. There are a number of both instructive and poignant stories that we're hearing. One man and his wife and his child were on a flight. They called his father twice to say that the stewardess had been stabbed, and called a second time to say that the plane was going down. The man was identified as a former Easton, Connecticut resident, Peter Hansen. A minister confirmed the cell phone call to his father, Lee Hansen, an official in Easton, a small town which is near Bridgeport on the coast. He called to his parents' home, and so in that way they were together at that moment, according to the Reverend Bonnie Bardot, as she was describing what transpired between this young man and his family on the plane before it went down. Another flight attendant on one of the American Airlines flights managed to call an emergency number as the flight was being hijacked, and she said that one of her fellow attendants had been stabbed. A San Francisco woman told KUTV in San Francisco, in that area, that her son, Mark Bingham, 31 years old, called her from aboard the United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania, saying, "We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb." That is Alice Hoagland quoting her son calling from the flight. This is what happened mid-morning today after the towers had been hit by the plane. They simply began to collapse. First tower number 2, which took the most severe hit, that's the one that had the huge fireball. The architect who designed these buildings later told NBC's George Lewis that the heat was so intense that the structural steel in a building like that will melt within 3 or 4 hours. Well, the heat was so intense it melted in a shorter time than that. Then the second one went down. These are 110 stories high. Many people were working in the building at the time. Some of them were trapped above what you see there. Others were below, still trying to get out. And, of course, it's very hard to imagine that there could have been very many survivors in that kind of collapse of steel, concrete, electrical circuitry, and glass. It created a kind of tornado effect in the canyons of Manhattan. A number of the NBC News correspondents were trapped, many of them in grave danger, as well as a lot of rescue workers, obviously, and other people who were in that area. And there are reports that between 200 and 300 firemen are missing who were in there at the time trying to rescue personnel. We heard earlier in a report from Dawn Fratangelo about a woman who was coming out of the building. She said the firemen were going up and she just knows that they were lost. These are the people who were watching that at the time. Let's go to the White House now, and NBC's Campbell Brown, who is in Washington, at least, if not at the White House. And tomorrow morning, the President's Day will begin early after this long and arduous day in which he addressed the nation tonight, Campbell.
Well, Tom, he convened a national security meeting here this evening after his remarks. That meeting has now ended, but I can tell you there are many, many lights still burning here at the White House tonight. And aides do tell us he is expected to begin the day early tomorrow, again meeting first thing in the morning with his national security team. The focus now shifting to, number one, getting federal aid to the thousands of people who have been touched by these attacks, and number two, focusing now on finding out who is responsible. The president, in his remarks tonight, having some very strong words regarding punishment for the terrorists, as well as any country, in his words, who harbors them. The president also tonight talking about how the country has the strength to overcome this. And here was the president from earlier this evening.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night.
Now, Tom, aides who spent the day traveling with the president described his demeanor throughout the day as somber but very even-keeled, that he was never overly emotional. His security was obviously a top priority today, which is why we saw Air Force One hopscotching around the country. He began the day in Florida at an education event, and that was really the one time that we